Yeah. So let's read the chapters that um, were left. Okay, so we are starting after um, hmm, we had read till the Lewis Club, and Lewis had um, found that there's this woman whom she is now going to go and meet in her restaurant. Let's see where this goes. The chapter is called The Hub, the Heart. This is chapter 22, if I'm not wrong. San Francisco is short on greenery, and the streets have bare brightness. Berkeley runs wilder, walking from the North Berkeley BART station to Cafe Candide. I had to circle around huge hedges that lurched and blocked the sidewalk. There were no lawns. Instead, residents cultivated behemoth planter boxes, personal citrus groves, gardens of meaty succulents that seemed to glow with an inner light. The streets were quiet, but I sensed eyes through gauzy curtains. A fat squirrel shadowed me for a block. In one place, a massive willow tree's roots had split the pavement. Its leaves brushed my head. I pulled out my phone to double check the restaurant's address, but I didn't have to search it. Cafe Candide was preemptively inscribed on the map like a government office or a natural landmark. When I emerged into the quiet shopping district, I saw the rim of the hills looming above, a dark cutout now turning pink in the evening light. The steep wooded slope, crusted with houses whose windows flashed white in the sun. I found the restaurant smashed between a hardware store and a mobile phone outlet, peddling a brand I didn't recognize. Both store and outlet looked like they belonged on this block. Cafe Candide, not so much. That impression was wrong, of course. Cafe Candide had stood here for decades while businesses flashed through the storefronts on both sides. It was a house of the darkest gingerbread, odd angled and enormous, seeming to lean slightly on its neighbors. Yes, Berkeley nuts and bolts and Air Zero were definitely providing significant structural support to the old restaurant. Cafe Candide's roof was densely shingled and sharply slanted. A short chimney tossed up a ragged streamer of smoke. It was very clearly a witch's abode. The house/restaurant was set back from the sidewalk, guarded by a stubbly face fence of wrought iron. The gate currently open. My heels thwopped across a patio paved in slate. The door was a slab of dark wood with an iron handle that matched the fence. The wood was carved with a maze like pattern. I wanted to pluck my finger down and find my way through it. The maze's channels shone smooth and glossy, so maybe I wasn't the first person to feel that impulse. There was no sign that said Cafe Candide. There was also no doubt that this was the place. I knocked or tried. My best effort produced barely any sound. It was like knocking on a mattress. So I took the door by its handle, hauled it open a crack, and before it could close again, I slithered through. Inside, a young woman in a linen smock was pushing a mop across gleaming floorboards. The soap smelled dense and spicy. "Excuse me," I said. Her eyes snapped up. "I'm here to see Charlotte Kingston. I called this morning." The smocked mopper nodded and beckoned for me to follow. She glided through the cool, dark dining room. The tables and chairs matched the paneling on the walls and the boards beneath my feet. The room could have been carved from one great block of wood. Everything was soft and smooth, polished by use. I saw myself reflected in the floor, a warm shadow. The smart mopper led me through a swinging door into the kitchen. According to Horace, this was it, the hub, the heart, sanctum sanctorum. The quiet workers before me, currently chopping, cleaning, carving, prepping, planning, all in matching smocks, would in time open restaurants, host TV shows, write best selling cookbooks. I had penetrated the innermost reach of California cuisine, where, as in Chef Kate's Kitchen, hip hop was playing on a boompy Bluetooth speaker. The smoked mopper glided through the kitchen, and I followed her path as precisely as I could, wary of getting in anyone's way. I kept my head down. Then I saw the oven. It was epic, with a pale stone dome, walls of black lacquered brick, and a yawning mouth with a flicking, fork, forking tongue of fire. The heat was palpable. From across the kitchen, as I passed, a red-faced baker twirled a long wooden paddle. Her arms were enormous and sent it slicing into the oven to slip beneath two loaves at once. With a snap of her shoulders, they were out, rough and crackly, uppermost edges singled back, singed black. Her bread looked even more rustic than Everett Bloom's, like some primordial, some primordial ancestor from a harder epoch, one that required more armor. As I watched, she dropped the loaves into a line that was forming on the countertop, then gave the paddle another twirl, tossing it into the air as she did, a confident flourish intended for no one but herself. Awesome! I groaned it out loud without intending to. She heard me, and a wicked grin flashed across her face. I spotted the baker's starter sitting on the countertop in a wide mouthed plastic tub. Its name was written on a band of peeling tape, Clint Eastwood. The smart mopper waited at the door, impatient with my own. I followed into a dark hallway lined with boards and pegs and shoes and boots on the floor, past a small washroom around a corner. We came to a door slightly ajar. The smoked mopper knocked gently, and when the reply came, a crisp command to enter, she left me to discover on my own what waited within. The room was long and skinny, set up against the back of the building, with tall windows that offered a panoramic view of the restaurant's backyard garden filtered through a veil of beans that climbed lengths of spring cooled taut across the windows, their leaves softening the light that fell into the study. Through the beans I saw figures moving in the garden, filling baskets with greens, more acolytes, serene in their linen smocks. At a small desk, Charlotte Kingston sat in dappled bean shadow. Before her were a laptop, an enormous pile of documents, and not one of but three phones. She was poking at one of them as I entered. She glanced up with a look of annoyance. It was definitely her, the central deity from the ferry building. Someone named Lawrence, I said. I talked to him on the phone. He said you would have time to see me around now. Lawrence is very accommodating, Kingston said. She lowered her glasses and took a recognition flitted across her face. I know you. How do I know you? I hadn't expected her to recognize me, but maybe the fact that I had presented her pantheon with something other than pickles had earned me a single sparking neuron. I told her I was Louis Clary. I'd tried out for the Bay Area farmers markets, all of them, and been rejected. Oh, I hope you're not here about that. Pity and impatience mixed in her voice. She fiddled with her phones, moving them in neat line. I wondered if she had a panic button mounted on the underside of her desk to call for help in case of confrontation by spurned farmers and or simpering gourmands. I came to show you something. I crossed the distance between us and extracted the copy of Horace's menu from my bag. This. She hitched her glasses up and peered at the menu. Goodness, do you remember it? Well, give me a moment. Her eyes flitted across the paper. I have made quite a few of these, 1979. This is ancient. Her eyes scanned farther down and something crossed her face. A softening. Oh, yes, I do remember. She looked up at me. Where did you find this? A friend of mine, Horace. He's a pistachio, of course, she chuckled. It's quite a hoard he's gathered. I didn't know I was a part of it. He has all your cookbooks too. A lot of people have my cookbooks. No one has these menus anymore. I wish I did. I wanted to ask you about something specific. About this meal. Go on. The bread. Sourdough a la musk. What was it? Where did it come from? Outside, the acolytes moved in the garden. It's the most interesting thing on the menu, isn't it? Kingston mused. I don't think that's obvious. Am I remembering correctly? You're a baker? Yes, I can see why you might be curious about this. Well, all right. She stood, slipped a manila folder under her arm, dropped her phone into each of her jacket's pockets, leaving the third on the table. Come along then, I'll explain. She led me through the warren, past the washroom, the boards, and back into the kitchen, where it was a different thing entirely to enter in the presence of Charlotte Kingston. Nothing outwardly changed, not one knife skipped a chop, but a crackling field of attention snapped into existence. Where's Lawrence? Kingston called out. Someone find Lawrence, please. His memory is required. Acolytes zipped out every door. Kingston glided over the burly baker. Mona, she said sweetly. The baker glowed. Kingston turned to me. This is Louis. She bakes. Mona's gaze cooled. It was an intruder in her. I was an intruder in her domain. Kingston lifted one of the loaves from the line, tapped it on its back. Lovely, she cooed. She remembered. She returned to the line and lowered her glasses. I've always thought the starter's influence was overstated. People tell these wild stories. Oh, I got it from such and such. It's been going strong since. You know, Sister Bernhild began it in a Gothenburg 100 years ago. That sort of a thing. But it's all basically the same. I agree, Mona said, as if she had any choice. But Kingston said there was an exception. Years ago, look at this. She handed Mona the menu I'd brought from 1979. You see, we were just starting. This was still Harriet Brayling's house, and we were her wild young friends. Kingston seemed to apply some retroactive skepticism to this, throwing these enormous dinners in her parlor. This kitchen was different. It was tiny. She snapped her head around. Where's Lawrence? I need him to remember something. Two more acolytes went scurry. She turned back to Mona and me. It was becoming a bit of a flop house. Harriet didn't mind. She was having the time of her life. It was that summer, I think, when Jim Basque wandered through. A friend of someone's, I can't remember who, Lawrence, another acolyte gone. He'd been in Europe. He'd met someone. They'd lived together in Brussels. She was a wonderful cook. Apparently, she baked bread. He fell in love. Then she left, and he ran out of money. He showed up here with nothing but a beat up old guitar and the sourdough starter she'd left behind. Around the kitchen, those acolytes who had not gone in search of Kingston's quarry tilted themselves to hear the story. This was precious history. Indoctrination. Jim Basque played his guitar all day, singing sad songs. He might have been in a band. I can't remember. I need Lawrence, but she chuckled, but she clucked. Here was the surprise. Every morning Jim baked. His lady taught him well. The bread was wonderful, but also she paused, looked from Mona to me with eyes that darted us to a question. What came next? There's no getting around it, is there? There were faces in the crust. These strange, sharp edged. She curled her fingers and made a face. An aesthetic mask. I recognized the spirit of it immediately. Her features returned to normal. We ignored them. Those weren't the strangest things we saw back then. Jim baked that bread every day. For 6 months, we paid him what we could. He saved it all up until he had enough for a ticket back to Europe. Mona was fully caught up in the story. To go after his lady? That was the idea. We threw him a going away party. She held up the menu, a feast for the unrequited. Back then, we could get away with names like this. She smiled and was lost for a moment. Someone, I can't remember who, where's Lawrence? He knows all these things. Someone tried to keep the starter alive, but it just, Kingston made a limp gesture. We all said it died of a broken heart. An acolyte burst into the kitchen, trailing a man wiry and bald, Kingston's age, cradling a bottle of wine under each arm. There you are, Kingston cried. His hair rose up in a frizzy halo around his skull. What is it, my love? I needed you for a story, but now I'm done with it. Do you remember Jim Bascule? I certainly remember Jim Bascule's beard, darling. Princeton offered the man the old menu for his inspection. He leaned close, and while his eyes scanned the page, she said to me, "This is my husband, Lawrence." Although he wasn't my husband when this menu was written. Lawrence looked up and said dryly, "I was only her lover then." "In any case," Livingston said, "I haven't thought about that bread in years. It was wonderful." It was clear that Mona the baker would have preferred for the story to be recounted to her exclusively. She addressed me. "You're a professional? Do you work for Broom or—" Here I was all Wellspring, the source, and this baker was checking my credentials. Her curious gaze joined by Kingston's now and Lawrence's, and I wanted to impress them. "I am the baker at the Mare Fair," I said. "The market on Alameda. Have you—" Charlotte Kingston's expression closed like a gate crashing down. She started to speak, but only made a clucking sound. Currents of annoyance swirled across her face. "The Marrow Fair," Lawrence repeated, trying the name on for sight. "Do you know it, darling?" "I do," Kingston said. "I've heard about it from Potasio and others." "Ah, Horace." "He's my friend," I said. "He found this menu for Lawrence's benefit," I explained. "It's a new kind of market." "Very forward thinking," Kingston said lightly. Other possible adjectives played across her lips. "It's found a things our restaurant here is quite retrograde, even a bit silly." I felt waves of opprobrium from the acolytes. If Kingston ordered them to beat me to death with rolling pins and stale sourdough, there could be no doubt they would do it. I spluttered. "I'm sure he doesn't. I mean, I don't really know anything about him. I only make bread. I have a robot." Mona looked at me with pity. One of those phones in Kingston's pocket buzzed. She peeked at the screen and said, "I'm sorry, I'm late for a call." Retreating back into the warren of the restaurant, she paused a moment, then turned. Her gaze was chilly and complex. "Now I wish I hadn't told you that story. Lawrence escorted me out of the Cafe Candide, and on the way through the dining room he swiped a bottle from inside a white cardboard box. "Take this to Horace. He'll like it." "Sorry," said Charlotte. "Sorry about Charlotte." "Well, not really. This Marrow Fair place sounds wretched." He said it with the winning diffidence. "But it's all changing, isn't it? No matter, we'll stay the same. You should come for dinner sometime. We have tables available next spring, I believe." That's the end of that chapter, but now we have an email from Bio. "It's strange to hear the starter might have reached San Francisco once before. Mainly, I'm surprised it wasn't a Maz who bought it. Actually, I think I might be a little bit scandalized. Who was this Jim Vasquez guy?" Sherman finished his album. It was 7 tracks, and he calls it the Maz tapes. I don't think he's ever touched a tape in his life. Sherry is super worried about it. She doesn't want him to use the word Maz, and it is very good news for me. I told her about my restaurant, and she barely blinked. "Sorry, Shaman." I attached the album. I like some of the tracks more than others. It gets oozy. But mostly I'm proud of my brother for making something that's truly hit. We have more chapters, of course. So the next chapter is called Boonville. This will be chapter 23, I guess. So this is chapter 23, Boonville. The expedient search engine revealed that Jim Bascule had sometime between the mid 1970s and today become a winemaker in Mendocino County. On the website for a winery called Tradecraft, I found his picture. He looked to be in his 60s, scruffy and the chin, blonde hair gone gray, curling down to his shoulders. There might be more than one Jim Baskin in the world, but this image reassured me. He looked like the kind of person who might have taken up residence at a turnip restaurant in Berkeley. The drive was long, 3 hours. I listened to the radio until the signal faded, then switched to Shaman's Mask remix album, which steadily increased the tempo as it proceeded from track to track. When it got to be too much, the sad mass voices all wrapped into the Chipmunk register, I stopped the album short and went back to the beginning, where was slower, with undistorted crooning brewed by a spare accompaniment that seemed to fit the landscape better. Fog became mist, which accumulated in sheets on my windshield. I drove very, very slowly, occasionally pulling into turnouts to allow pickup trucks to roar past me, sending up high plumes behind them. My car moaned pitifully as I crawled over a step, switched backing, rise, then coasted with palpable relief down a long and lazy slope towards my destination. Boonville was a short strip of shops and restaurants huddled along California's Route 128, where it dropped into the golden fold of Anderson Valley. There were wineries on both sides of the road, some with ramshackle tasting rooms. The local brewery maintained a hopyard, pale butts clinging to long wires parallel to the road. I passed a broad faced hotel that seemed to preside over the tiny town. I thought about stopping, maybe on the way back. My phone had no signal here, but it had already loaded the map I needed and my GPS showed the way. I turned off the highway onto a hard packed dirt road, now mottled with puddles, and followed it for a mile until I saw a wooden sign for tradecraft. The driveway plunged through the scrim of eucalyptus and dipped to cross a wide bridge over a rushing creek. The planks went thump, thump, thump beneath my tires. My car's engine groaned a little as I pushed it crunching into a gravel parking lot. There were two more vehicles parked there in the rain. The winery was a long building with a log cabin look. A small sign advertised the tasting room. Inside I found a middle-aged woman sitting on a stool behind a countertop, absorbed in a Thomas Pynchon novel. She set it aside when she saw me. Welcome to Tradecraft. Not the nicest day for wine tasting, is it? Anyone else or just you? I told her I was alone and that I was here to see Jim Basket. He just went to drop a couple cases off at the hotel. He'll be back here soon. Can I offer you a taste while you wait? I'm Barbara. I acquiesced, peeled off my jacket, and sat it down with my tote bag containing a loaf or bread. I was always carrying bread these days. I sipped samples of three red wines and two whites as Barbara probed me gently, learning that I lived in San Francisco. I loved the city and worked as a programmer. Is everyone a computer person now? It seems that way, but also big bread. Have you been to the bakery across from the hotel? They make the best scones, the best. And I had, in fact, bought a loaf of for Jim Basquiat. How nice! Well, he should be back any minute. Let's finish with this. The tradecraft cure, the whatever. It's what we are known for. She uncorked a slender bottle and poured a trickle into a narrow glass. The wine shimmered thickly. Have you heard of botrytis? She said the word carefully. Botrytis. They call it the noble rot. These grapes actually get moldy on the wine. On purpose, I mean. It gives the wine a flavor, you see. I took a sip. The wine felt heavy in my mouth. It was very sweet but also tartly acidic, and the taste lingered for a long time. Barbara poured a glass for herself, nearly full size, and her eyes were closed when she lifted it to her lips. We were both quiet, sipping, when I felt a draught of cold, wet air. Barbara's eyes fluttered open. There he is! Jim Bascule was short and lean, a 60-year-old man with the bearing of a boy. His chin bristled with blond whiskers, and his hair was pulled away from his shoulders into a neat ponytail. I introduced myself. Oh, he shook my hand, looking plainly puzzled. Are you the Jim Bascule who baked at Cafe Candide? His eyebrows leapt. I'm not sure if I am, but I remember him, sure. How do you know about that? As explanation, I hauled my tote bag onto the countertop, drew out the loaf of bread, and thumped it down. He looked at me. He looked first at me, then at the bread. He smiled, and of course the bread smiled back. I followed him out of the tasting room into a cluttered kitchen. Cases of wine were stacked haphazardly. There were also miscellaneous wheels of cheese and thin sausages hanging on strips like torpid bats. A slab of wood supported an array of jams as well as what appeared to be a loaf of bread, its brown bottom peeking out from underneath a towel patterned blue flowers with blue flowers. Bascule swept the towel back. The loaf underneath was round and thick crusted with a burnish to shame Everett Bloom. That crust didn't show a face, but instead an intricate spiral. Did you do that yourself? I asked. I think you didn't. You know I didn't, Basquiat said. Here's what he told me. When he was preparing this to reunite with his love in Europe, or so he thought, Jim Basquiat left the starter with his parents in Santa Rosa. And then he shared with them his suspicion that it needed music to flourish. Things didn't work out in Brussels, he said. Oh gosh, she lived in this little apartment overlooking an alley. She had a balcony where she grew herbs. She knew everyone, and she was always helping people, little favors and big ones, too. I was smitten. There was no question. I built her up in my mind while I was away. By the time I returned, she'd met someone else, the gorgeous Greek guy. I didn't stand a chance. So I wandered a bit, got involved in other things. What kind of things? Oh, things I didn't come back to the States until 1985. When I returned, I discovered my dad still had the starter going. The whole time, Basket started to laugh. He'd been playing it the Grateful Dead. So here I was, seeing the hippie spiraling crust of a dead head starter. I still play it the dead every night. There's a lot of bootlegs. But how? Why? Here's my theory. Honed over decades of bullshitting to myself, this starter is it uses music as a kind of synchronization. It helps the little yeast and whatever else is to do the right things at the right times. You gotta be careful though. Careful how? Maskell laughed dryly. I used to play around with other music just to see. You know, that classical tune, Flight of the Bumblebee. He whistled a bit of the breakneck melody. I left it alone for 15 minutes, no more. When I came back inside, it had spilled out of its container. It was everywhere. He eyed me sharply. When you see anything like that, you seen anything like that with yours? I confessed I hadn't. The Clement Street starter was well behaved. Well, be careful. I think the music matters. After that happened, I thought I'd finally killed it. Stuff barely bubbled for weeks. Now I just play the dead, good vibes. I traced my finger around the maze, an inch above the sourdough's crust. Don't you find this really exceptionally strange? Basquiat shrugged. I have done a bit of reading. The way these things work together, it's unbelievable. I'm sure you have heard all this stuff about the bacteria in your gut, how they are like a second brain. There's a lab. This was just published recently. There's a lab where they've got some yeasts hooked up to the internet. You can log in and reprogram the DNA. That sounded like a terrible idea. My point is, there are things in this living world plenty weirder than this. If you want proof, just come back and visit us in the fall. See the grapes, the ones with the fungus. You ever heard of a suitcase clone? No, well. Okay, come back in the fall. Before I left the winery, I asked one last question. Who was she, the woman in Belgium, who gave you the starter? Basker shook his head. She had the strangest name. On the way out of town, I stopped at the Boonville Hotel. Inside, I walked down a shadowed hall to claim a stool at the short bar. I was the only one there, and when the bartender appeared, who was also the hotel's manager, I ordered a glass of tradecraft Gewürztraminer. Through an open doorway, I watched a small kitchen staff working quietly, preparing that evening's meal. I wondered how one of the General Dexterity's robot arms with kitchen skills would fit in here on the slide of California State Route 128. Would it ruin the kitchen or improve it? I genuinely didn't know. I sipped my wine slowly. I pondered the egg problem. I wondered what other music I could play the Clement Street starter. Was there any album, any composition that would encourage a crust that looked simply normal? The bartender manager came back out and asked me if I'd be joining them for dinner. I asked him what they were serving, and he reported roasted chicken accompanied by a a panzanella salad with tomatoes from the garden and croutons from homemade sourdough. I told him I had to get back to the office. From Bio. You should have seen my mother's face when Shaman and I asked her about Jim Bascule. She told us she hadn't thought of the name in 30 some years. Apparently, when he appeared again in Brussels, Sharia was shocked. She refused him and she told us she felt bad about it. But he was too short and he couldn't cook anything. Well, he could bake bread, but she taught him that. And there was another man, he was Greek. This was before Leopold. My father wasn't home when we were talking about all of this, and I think that was probably for the best. But I understand what she means about the cooking. It's crucial in mass relationships, especially in the beginning. How do you even get started if you can't woo the other person with your spicy soup? From you. That wasn't a euphemism. Okay, so that's the end of the chapter. Now we have chapter 30, no, not 34, it's 24, chapter 24, the egg problem. Finally, the chapter, the egg problem, is actually was a very big problem that Lewis is going to solve for everyone. So as we know, the robot arm was not able to do much. It, even though it taught it how to knead dough, that was it, what it could do. Like it was completely useless. But she wanted it to be able to completely bake the bread or like ready the batter for it. So now we'll get to see what she does with the arm to make it do so. During my senior year of college, at the urging of a professor who specialized in the history of the assembly line, I had embarked on a self directed project to identify the first use of a computer program in a manufacturing process. After a senior, After a semester of digging through libraries in East Lansing and Ann Arbor, I had scrounged a few early samples, but I failed to convince either Evelyn Simmons or myself that I had succeeded in my task. Nevertheless, she gave me a 4.0 and told me I'd learned a useful skill. I used it now. I was going to be the one to solve the egg problem. I read up on anatomy and physiology. I acquired textbooks for students of physical therapy and DVDs for students of dance. I tracked down software from a company called Anatomics and could accurately simulate the flex of skin and muscle, and I inspected every menu, every command. Horace became my research assistant. He scoured the internet and brought me three new kinesiology papers every day. Dropped them on the countertop, still warm from the laser printer. Sometimes, when I was sitting at the long picnic table, reading and rereading the papers, sipping endless cappuccino provided by Naz, I paused to wonder who paid for all this? The master of the market, the figure known universally as Mr. Marrow, was an enigma. Horace hypothesized that our patron was the scion of an old San Francisco family and earned its fortune feeding the Barbary host. Nas was more paranoid and said Mr. Marrow walked among us. He could be Horace for all we know. I heard from others that Mr. Marrow was obviously Anthony Bourdain, definitely Ferran Adria, indisputably Serge Brin. Every day, I carried a carton from open pantry and placed it before the Vitruvian. One by one, it lifted the eggs, and one by one, it ruined them. I imagine Mr. Marrow looking at rapidly growing outlay of pasture-raised eggs and wondering, what the? I watched the Vitruvian make 100 attempts without any apparent improvement. At the Task Acquisition Center, identical arms had ruined probably thousands of eggs. What happened to those eggs? Did we, the dexterous, eat them as breakfast scrambles? I hope we did. The problem wasn't the training. There was something about this task that eluded ARM OS, even when it had mastered so many others. It could assemble a phone, but it couldn't open an egg. Could I criticize it really? My own egg cracking experiment was extremely limited. A cookie baking spree during my senior year of college, everything but the egg and a little butter was already in the box. And in that time, I'd certainly never attempted to do it with one hand, which was what was required of the Vitruvian. Even with the benefit of two hands, my egg cracking had been fumbling, borderline disastrous. A gentle rain of eggshells into the cookie mix, shards removed carefully one by one. If I was going to have any hope of teaching the Vitruvian, I would have to master the skill myself. I opened the expedient video sharing website on my laptop, searched for how to crack an egg, and was rewarded with thousands of results. I selected the first and watched a disembodied hand crack an egg against the rim, a clear glass bowl, and pull its halves apart. Two fingers forward, two back. The gesture was almost obscenely elegant. I tried to copy that I saw on the screen and was rewarded with a smear of yolk across my palm. I felt a surge of kinship with the Vitruvian. We were starting at the same level. But there was a difference between us. I learned fast. Thwack, crack, pull. Only after a few attempts I could do it nearly as my faceless tutor. Thwack, crack, pull. There's a technical term for this, one-shot learning. You see something once, you can do it. Programmers who work on artificial intelligence sorry. Oh God. Okay, sorry. And robot locomotion regard it with nearly mystical awe. Having mastered the elegant one-handed egg crack in if not one, then maybe three shots, I set myself to the deeper task of understanding it. I pushed all my awareness into my hands, muscles, tendons, finger pads, thwack, crack, pull, thwack, crack, another smear as quickly as I learned I had unlearned it. Thwack, the shell didn't even crack. My fingers trembled. I repeated the cycle every afternoon for a week. Every session contained, at its peak, a few perfect, satisfying cracks with a broken shell levered apart by the subset working of my fingers and palm. But the sessions all ended the same way. With me, so lost in amped up self awareness, proprioception, proprioception, that I was sticking in the eggs harmless, finishing the eggs harmlessly off the bowl, or demolishing them entirely, just like the Vitruvian. Our performance converged. I had nothing to teach it. After this happened, I would angrily dispose the broken eggs, feeling stupid and wasteful, then stomp out and drop the concourse in frustration. And I would watch the other people work. When used his espresso machine, it was musical. Clop of water filter, hiss of steam, gurgle of milk, clink of saucer. When Anita worked her cricket flour into dough, she stared into space, thinking with her hands. That's what I wanted to achieve. Even Jenna, when she shuttled samples between her great microbial menagerie and the DNA Spencer, her fingers and feet moved of their own accord. She was elsewhere, gaze clouded, brain churning. She could have done it with her eyes closed. That, of course, was it. I ran back to my workstation, opened my laptop, and made sure I was synchronized with the latest changes to ARM OS. It was going to be so simple. It was going to be huge. To date, my contributions to the code base had been tiny refinements, painstaking embroideries in the tight tapestry of proprioception. Also had written a related debugging panel for interface, but I would never admit to that. Now, I created a module from whole cloth. It was concise, not even 100 lines of code, built in perfect symmetry around a single action, one by one, in exactly the right order. I suspended the arm's motor control loops. Then I loaded the action directly into the PKD 2891 stepper motors, which most people didn't realize you could do. They all had their own MCUs with just enough memory for what came next. Then, one by one, I brought the motor loops back online. I finished my new module, named it, tried to compile, was informed of several embarrassing syntax errors, corrected them, compiled again. I flashed the Vitruvian with the new code and said aloud, try again. It plugged with up an egg, moved it lightly into position, paused, and thwacked the egg against the rim of the bowl. Just after the thwack, my new module took over. The motor control loops went dark. The arm wasn't running blind, it was more like a blink. Not even 100 milliseconds during my new module said, just go for it. In the ARM OS code base, as part of the control package, I had created something new, a tiny space without feedback or self awareness, and I had named it Confidence. The yolk flowed out with the albumin while the shell came apart cleanly in the Vitruvian's six-fingered grip. The arms swiveled and dropped the shell neatly into the small bowl I had set up for that purpose. The bowl that had never before this moment actually been needed. I had solved the egg problem, and I had done so in the simplest way possible, not by adding code but by taking it away. During the blink, the Vitruvian was no longer caught in a wash of continuous feedback. It was no longer second guessing its second guesses 1,000 times every second. I bundled my new module into a pull request and sent it upstream, straight into the master branch of ARM OS. I didn't even write a commit message. The module name would suffice. I waited for the emails. My heart was pounding. Do that again, I told the Vitruvian. Thwack, crack, pull. My laptop pinched. It was a message from Peter, composed entirely of exclamation marks. Confidence. Wow, I loved how she just solved the egg problem. Like, especially the part where she was like, okay, I did not add new code, I took it away. Like when I was guessing and second guessing the things that I did. I think a lot of times like humans also do that, right? And that's what keeps us stuck. So the last chapter of this video is going to be elephants' armpits, apparently. Horace's elephants' armpits, that's weird. Horace's newsletter. These newsletter brought with it a schedule of classes. The expertise of Marrow Fair shared freely. Aeroponics with Kianata on Monday, cheese tasting with Orly on Tuesday, bug husbandry with Anita on Thursday, and on Friday, Jenna would teach a workshop on DNA sequencing. I recruited Horace and we went together. A very small group gathered at noon in the center of Jenna's lab. Naz from the coffee bar and there was there, as well as Clay from New Bagel and Kenata, one of the pink light farmers. Jenna offered a plastic dish. Who wants to spit? Horace raised his hand and expectorated neatly. Okay, Jenna said. So there's a whole lot of things living in human mouths, and we might want to know what they are. You want to know, don't you, Mr. Potassium? You have no idea. Biologists have become very interested in communities of microorganisms, Jenna said. Characterizing the community in a sample like this used to be a laborious process, but now, watch. Her machine was enormous, as big as a refrigerator, with a round cornered plastic carapace, glossy white with black accents. A line of letters on the front edge named it the Illumina Hypersensus. Jenna pressed a button on its belly and the machine released a tray. She laid the dish of Horace's spit into place, and when she pressed the button again, the machine pulled the tray back into itself and began to hum. What's it doing? Naz asked. First, it denatures the sample. It heats the microbes up to make them relax. Then it mashes them up using tiny beads. It's quite a massacre. I raised a finger. Won't that all mix the different DNA together? Yes, but they can't hide. Microorganisms share a lot of genes, but there's one that's unique between species. 16S. It's like a fingerprint. Jana grinned wolfishly. So we'll pick through the body parts to find the fingerprints. We all thought about that for a moment, while machine boomed and whirred. While it's smashing, Jenna said, I'll show you my collection. She led us to an enormous refrigerated cabinet stocked with trays, each holding a dozens of tiny vials. This is why I came here, Jenna said proudly. Mr. Maru promised me a subscription to the Global Microbe Survey. It's not cheap. Boris gravitationally attracted to collections of all kinds, put, put his face up against the glass. What do you have in there? Environmental samples. The National Science Foundation sends students all over the world. I did it one summer in grad school. It's a bit of wonderful, really. You picked the wildest place you can imagine. I went to Greenland. You went to Greenland on purpose? Nat said. It was very interesting, microbially. I sent back huge ducks. She circled her arms around an imaginary barrel full of ice and mud. Rainwater, too. So this is a catalogue of puddles, Forrest said. His breath was fogging up the glass. Among other things, there's a bit of the Great Lakes in there. The Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Swamps, volcanoes. There are samples scraped out of caves and birds' nests and elephants' armpits. New samples are coming in constantly. I just got one from an Arby's in Clearwater, Florida. We all shuddered. How many labs have a subscription like this? I asked. 30? 35? Like I said, it's not cheap. What do you do with it? Jenna's face took a hungry look. Think of it as a raw genetic ore. All the subscribers are on a mailing list. When a lab identifies a new species, they send out an alert. I just heard that an organism in Mono Lake sample has some interesting enzymatic regulation properties. So I'm going to see if I can isolate it, and the sequencing machine interrupted with a low and commanding chime. Oh, here we go. Jana Mitra tilted the laptop beside the Illumina hypersenses. Anyway, she said, let's hope Mr. Potashio's saliva isn't as mysterious as those samples. On the laptop screen, she swiped the cursor with the ease of long practice, summoning the machine's result. Horace frowned. I accept it to be strange and wondrous. On the screen, a spiky line appeared, utterly unremarkable. It could have been the price of of a stock or a temperature in a Midwestern city. Then another layer of information arrived, a label for each of the spikes. Jenna read them off. Veillonella, Prevotella, Monoes, gingivalis, but not too much. Oh, and streptococcus. That's what gives you strep throat. But it's also what they use to make Swiss cheese. You have a very healthy oral microbiome, Mr. Potashio. Forrest looked disappointed. Kanata was growing agitated. I don't understand how you use this information, he said. The tone of his voice indicated he did, in fact, have his suspicions and he didn't like them. My work is all about microbial communities, Jenna said. If you want to know how your plants are doing, you need to look at them, right? This is how I look at my community. He narrowed his eyes. You're just reading DNA, not editing it? Jenna pursed her lips. I've experimented with CRISPR protocols, of course. These colonies all collapsed, but. Seriously, he sputtered. You need to come here to do that? He clutched his head and walked in a little circle, disbelief. I thought space was supposed to be for new ideas, but I don't know. Dr. Mitra sounds a lot like the old GMO shit. It's really not. Did you get rejected from DuPont or what? No, maybe. You should take this there. They'd be all over it. You have a problem with lembas, Jenna said flatly, but I'm not sure what it is. If this approach Everything you're doing, the scanning, the editing, it's the height of hubris. Like the height. Look around. I'm sorry, it sounds mean, but we don't need you to work on this. The plans are way ahead of you. Doctor, do you really think Mr. Maris supports my project? Kanata snorted. I wonder what he'd say if I told him it was either your lab or our grow rooms. We make half of the food that goes out of the door here. He started to stomp away, then caught himself and turned back, made a final plea. I'm no traditionalist, I mean, pink LEDs, come on. But there's difference, right? Plants have developed over millions of years. They just work. What you're doing, it's not natural. Janet licked her tongue. Nothing is natural. After the sequencing session was over, I walked with Horace through the grove of the heart of the concourse. These are mere lemons, Horace said as we passed the trees, named for Frank Nicholas Mayer, Dutch by birth, but an agent of the United States government. He worked for the Department of Agriculture's Office of Seed and Plant Introduction. Before the First World War, I thought of him when Jenna spoke of a microbial survey. Mayer and his cohort were hunters for larger prey. They canvassed the world and sent back living samples of plants thought to be useful to the advancement of the American economy. Mayer worked in China. He sent the first soybean to America, and persimmons. Yes, persimmon grew in this country today comes from that lineage. And of course, there are these lemons named for him. Mayer died in China. He drowned in the Yangtze, pushed by a riverboat. I looked at the trees with new appreciation. He sent these across the Pacific, and the Spanish sent tomatoes to Italy in the 16th century, and the Portuguese chilies to India. And maybe a comet brought it all to Earth. Who knows? I quite agree with Jem. He plucked a lemon from a tree. Nothing is natural. Okay. So that's the end of chapter 25, and that's where we'll end this video. The next video will have chapters 26 to 30 in it, and then we'll just finish this book over in the last video. So, bye bye. See you then.